Good morning. I'm Aditya Gupta, a corporate lawyer leading the corporate and economic law initiatives at SEC. I welcome you all to the third SEC SEBI Civis Dialogue. We are delighted by our response on the previous two discussions, the recent one being on credit rating agencies. Today, we are here with you to discuss yet another matter of seminal importance: environment, social, and governance, and sustainable finance in light of SEBI's recent consultation paper issued on the 16th of August 2024 that aims to expand the scope of sustainable finance framework in the context of the Indian securities market. The idea is to bring in a robust and efficient framework for ESG debt securities in line with international best practices. We have with us today to be a part of this discussion are experts from SEBI, Mr. Rishi Barua and Ms. Priyanka Meena. Mr. Rishi Barua is a seasoned management professional working with SEBI from the past 18 years. He's presently leading the team working on matters pertaining to corporate bonds, including green bonds, municipal bonds, and securitized debt instruments. Ms. Priyanka Meena is a postgraduate in management and also specializes in policy matters pertaining to corporate bonds, including green bonds, municipal bonds, and securitized debt instruments. A very warm welcome to both of you. To start with our discussion, Mr. Barua, if you could throw light on the current regulatory framework for raising sustainable finance and trace the journey of its evolution over the years.
Yeah, so in the area of sustainable finance, SEBI introduced a regulatory framework for listed issuances of green debt securities as a mode of sustainable finance in 2017. So in the backdrop of the increasing interest in a sustainable finance world, SEBI undertook a review of the regulatory framework for green debt securities with a view to align the extant framework for green debt securities with the updated green bond principles of the ICMA, which is the International Capital Market Association, which are recognized by ISCO also. So accordingly, after this review in around February 2023, SEBI revamped the regulatory framework pertaining to issuance of green debt securities. So in that, SEBI enhanced the scope of definition of green debt security by including new modes of sustainable finance. For example, pollution prevention and control, eco-efficient products, and so on. Also, SEBI introduced a concept of blue bonds. So it relates to water management and marine sector. Also yellow bonds, which relates to the solar energy, and transition bonds, these are all subcategories of green debt securities. And further, in light of this, the green debt security was defined and expanded to include a list, for example, renewable sustainable energy, including wind, bioenergy, clean transportation, some climate change, and so on. So in this way, SEBI enhanced the scope, introducing the green energy, green securities and all, and also to facilitate this transparency, informed decision-making amongst the investors in the green debt securities. SEBI prescribes certain granular compliance and disclosure requirements for the issuers. For example, like appointment of a third-party auditor reviewer, impact reporting, and disclosure of some major elements of business responsibility and sustainable reporting. And also, like SEBI, in order to address certain concerns of greenwashing, SEBI prescribes certain do's and don'ts regarding that, so that the issuer of green debt security, what they must ensure to avoid the occurrences of greenwashing. So these are some of the steps that SEBI had taken prior to this. Further, it was also felt that more expansion can be done in line with the international frameworks. And with that backdrop, this consultation paper has been introduced.
Having said that, do you feel that the framework has achieved its desired goal? Of course, there might be some missing elements. That's why this consultation paper has come about. So what do you see, what do you feel seems lacking in the extant framework?
So, in this regard, so what we felt that this green debt security was addressing the environmental concern only. So, since we are also considering ESG attributes, which is a now global concern, so we felt that we can expand this framework to include social bonds, sustainability bonds, and sustainability linked bonds, which are a part of, and also green. So these are all part of the ESG attributes. So for that, we are expanding the scope of the framework and include these terms also, so that issuers can also have they can also come and raise funds to these sources.
Thank you, sir. That's very relevant. And now, having understood the regulatory framework, I would like to ask that what are the various sustainability linked securities that are presently under consideration of SEBI? And if you could throw light on them one by one.
Okay, so Aditya, before I respond to this question, let me give you a brief background why sustainable finance is in the picture. So, United Nations have something called 17 development goals, right? Sustainable development goals, which are essential for achieving our agenda, that is 2030 agenda for sustainable development. And to achieve that development, a tremendous amount of funding is required. And in that, capital debt market will play a very important role. So that's how sustainable finance came into picture. So as Rishi sir mentioned earlier, our regulatory framework only focuses on the green debt securities that are limited to environmental sustainability. But other goals like poverty, other social causes, gender related requirements, those are not covered in the existing framework. So what SEBI is doing with this consultation paper is that we are trying to expand the scope of sustainable finance in our securities market. We will include social bonds. We will include sustainable bonds, which is a combination of social bonds and green bonds, and then something called sustainability linked bonds. So globally or generally, sustainable finance is categorized into two parts. One is use of proceed based finance and another is KPI linked finance. So our framework, as I have mentioned earlier, green debt securities, which is a part of use of proceed based finance, but a limited. So with that view in mind, we are including social bonds, sustainable bonds, and sustainability linked bonds. And further, in the consultation paper, we have also sought comments on introduction of a concept called sustainable securitized debt instruments. So these are the securities that we are considering for this expansion of scope of sustainable finance.
I see. Thank you, Ms. Meena. And now that we know that there will be varied opportunities to direct fixed income capital towards new issuers and eligible ESG projects, could you also tell us what regulatory measures are being proposed in respect of such securities? What you just mentioned, social bonds, sustainable bonds, and sustainability linked bonds. Like, do you have a regulatory blueprint in mind for these securities?
So as part of this consultation paper, we are seeking comments whether introduction of such framework is right at this moment or not. And after that, SEBI will work with the Industry Standards Forum, which SEBI has set up to seek inputs on timely basis for the implementation of such regulations. So the detailed framework that will be issued after receiving necessary recommendations from ISF. So at this stage, the purpose of this consultation paper is to seek view whether introduction of such framework is okay, is appropriate and adequate or not. So on that.
So there are basically some international frameworks in place. So this consultation paper is seeking that comments which international frameworks can be taken into consideration. And obviously it has to be suited and adjusted in the Indian context also. So for that, we are also we have to go back to the industry standards forum so that they can also give their views and recommendations on this.
Absolutely, that's very relevant. And as you mentioned for the previous question, that already the definition of green security, it has been enhanced. And I believe this happened in February of 2023. It's a very broad and an inclusive definition, which includes blue bonds, yellow bonds, and has many such categories. And always there's a scope for improvement to bring the definition in line with the international frameworks. So do you see an amendment happening to the NCS regulations, the non-convertible securities regulations?
So NCS regulations will be amended to enable the provisions for introducing the detailed framework for such securities. So the enabling provision will be there in NCS, which will be done by, of course, amending the NCS regulations.
Of course, subject to consultations and the responses that you get from the market participants.
Correct.
That is very helpful. And now coming to our next question. So do you feel that this new classification of ESG debt securities, it covers both use of proceed bonds and key performance indicators bonds?
So like I mentioned, social bonds, sustainable bonds, which are essentially use of proceed bond, and the sustainability linked bonds, which is a KPI linked bond. So let me give you a brief what is use of proceeds bond. So
Sure.
Use of proceeds bonds are basically where the proceeds are earmarked for a certain project. But in case of KPI bonds, key performance indicator bonds, in that the proceeds are not tied to a project. You can raise it for general corporate purposes, but it should be in alignment with your overarching organization sustainability objectives. So for example, a firm's commit, I want to reduce my carbon emissions. So that can be your KPI. And to achieve, you can set that as a KPI and then you can raise funds. As long as you are meeting those targets which you have set, it would be part of sustainability linked bonds, that is KPI bonds.
I see. A follow-up would that to that would be that when it comes to key performance indicator bonds, these key indicators, would the organization set them themselves? And would there be some regulatory oversight over these key performance indicators?
So like we mentioned that it will be in alignment with international frameworks, what is happening globally. So similarly, I'll give you just an example. For example, guidelines of International Capital Market Association, ICMA, which is widely used globally. So they have this sustainability linked bond guidelines. So there they have defined how a KPI should be, how a sustainability performance target, which would be used to measure that KPI. So though similarly in India also, it will be linked with the practices happening globally. And of course, the issuer will themselves choose the KPIs. As a regulator, we can't tell the issuer what your KPI should be. It is up to the issuer, you choose, and then you come to the market to meet those objectives.
I see. That's a very relevant example that you shared from the international best practice that's been followed. And I also believe that there was this working group which came out with 9 critical ESG attributes or areas that could be considered as key performance indicators. And this was, I believe, a part of the business reporting and business responsibility and sustainability reporting.
Yeah, so Aditya, regarding the KPI, see, it can be your environmental KPIs, like you want to reduce your carbon emission, or it can be a social KPI. For example, you want to educate the underprivileged. That is up to the issuer what kind of KPIs they want to choose. We, as SEBI, currently we have not prescribed what your KPIs would be. And that's how it is going to be.
It's only an indicative list of areas that has been provided. So what we have is probably greenhouse gas emissions, checking the water footprint, or investments, or total waste generated, embracing employee well-being. So it's just an indicative list that we have. which will of course develop as in when we get more comments and the framework is concretized in that regard.
Correct.
Great. So we have a clarity now on what are use of proceed bonds and what are key performance indicator bonds. Now, coming to the international frameworks, you cited one example. Which other international frameworks are proposed to be treated as benchmarks to govern the issuance of ESG debt securities? And are there any such frameworks in consideration yet?
So in this regard, I'd like to say that SEBI has set up this industry standards forum. This forum is comprising of the representation from various industry bodies like CIF, FICCI, ASSOCHAM. So they are the body to set standards for implementation of regulatory framework. So in this consultation paper also, we have said that in discussion with ISF, we'll be having which regulatory framework would be in place. That would be after discussion. So prima facie, what we felt, we have also shared in that consultation paper, that some of the frameworks could be the green bond principles of ICMA, ICMA, the social bond principles, the sustainability bond guidelines, sustainability linked bond principles. These are all of ICMA. Then we have the climate bond standards. So these are some of the indicative. However, like after consultation, if feedbacks are received from somebody says this regulatory framework you can also have a glance through, so it will be taken up accordingly.
That is great. And when the market comments come in, as you mentioned, then we can have better frameworks. And if there are any better frameworks, then they would be taken into consideration, as you said.
Yeah.
So now you also raised a very important aspect of disclosure requirements. So when it comes to ESG securities, what are the additional disclosure requirements, both initial and continuous, for ESG debt securities? And this is especially important when we talk about greenwashing.
Yeah, so Aditya, disclosures, of course, are very crucial, because when an investor is making a decision that I want to invest in certain security, what they have is disclosure, and based on those disclosures, they make their decision. And given these all these ESG securities are relatively new, specifically if we talk about in Indian market, it's new. So of course, disclosures are very important at this stage. For these new categories that we are including, social bonds, sustainable bonds, or sustainability linked bonds, for these we have not defined the detail what would be the disclosure requirements. But this would be in line with the international frameworks, which would be selected by the ISF, and accordingly the disclosure requirements would be prescribed. But for our green debt securities, I'll give you an example. We have additional disclosure requirements in place. So for example, if you are coming out with a green debt security, so you will have to disclose your what are your goals, where your proceeds will be used, and how you have selected this project, and why do you think it's green. So those kind of requirements goes into offer documents. Those are your initial disclosure requirements. And when it comes to continuous disclosure requirements, so you will have to tell utilization of proceeds. Where have you allocated the proceeds which are not yet utilized? So the allocation of proceeds. And then in the annual report also, we have specified that you have to disclose certain part of BRSR, that is business responsibility and sustainability reporting. And then impact reporting also we have said. So that you have to give project by project basis. So for example, you have raised funds for 10 projects. Then you will have to give the report specific to every project, what impact that project has created. So these are some kind of disclosure requirements that we have in place for green debt securities. And similarly, once we have finalized the framework, which international framework we are aligning to, once we receive recommendations from ISF, accordingly for these new proposed securities, disclosure requirements will be prescribed.
Great. That gives us a lot of clarity on the disclosure requirements. And you mentioned the important aspect of the business responsibility and sustainability reporting. And having mentioned about that, do you feel that there's a likelihood of an excess burden being placed on the issuers, and especially when the BRSR it places, I wouldn't call it an obligation because it's a comply or explain framework, but around 1,000 listed companies, they are expected to make some disclosures in the financial year 23-24.
Actually, we do not see any excess burden the way the question you have asked, because what we feel disclosures are very crucial in this market for the investors to make an informed decision. Now, it is up to the issuers to raise funds through debt market. And once they decide that they will come through the debt market, then the issuer have to comply with the regulatory requirements. And this is basically to protect the investors and protect the investors' interest and to facilitate the informed decision making on their part. So, and what we also feel that this new concept that we came out in the consultation paper, the ESG debt securities, it is a relatively new concept for all. And we feel to instill confidence in the investors of such securities. So disclosures are a very integral part of this whole process. So in that way, already the disclosures currently that we have in the SEBI framework regulations about the green debt and transition, we have the additional disclosure on transition bonds also, like we have to mention about the transition plan and to define, to indicate that it's a separate thing. So like there's a GBT, so we have that kind of nomenclature to define it as green bonds dash transition. So we have those disclosures for enabling the investors to have a perfect, like have an informed decision. So here also we will have this kind of disclosures probably after what kind of framework, that is obviously left open for as of now, but disclosures are there. So I don't think it's an extra kind of burden. It's only that it will help the investors to facilitate their decision making and investments in that particular green bond framework.
And so, Aditya, to add to what Rishi sir said, on your point on BRSR. So currently for green debt securities, the issuer are not required to disclose all the 9 principles that are there in the BRSR. Only the principle 6 that is focused on environmental objectives. So only that part is required to be disclosed by the issuer. And when you are raising green bonds, your investors should know where your funds are going, if it is in fact or in reality creating the impact or not. So that's how it becomes pretty essential to put in place such disclosure requirements.
So you have very well explained the entire disclosure framework and what might be in the offing, given the international frameworks and the comments that you get. Now we shift our focus to another very important aspect of securitization. And sustainable securitization, again, is a very new domain when it comes to the Indian securities market. Reflecting on that, how can the sustainable securitization framework be developed for the Indian securities market?
So Aditya, on this, now that we are expanding the scope of sustainable finance in our country, we are introducing new project. So through securitization, we believe that we'll give more avenues to invest for investors. So in securitization, what happens? You repackage your securities in interest-bearing securities, and then you issue to investors. So in sustainable securitized debt instruments, what we are proposing that underlying would be a sustainable debt instrument or sustainable finance instruments. That could be your loans, that could be your bonds. As long as the underlying is satisfying the principles of sustainable finance, SEBI would be okay if originators are selling off those securities and floating securitized debt instruments. And to give effect to this concept, we will be amending our SDI regulations, of course. And for this also, the disclosure requirements will also be in line with those frameworks only, which the underlying securities are following. So currently, that's how we are looking at this new instrument.
And when we talk about securitization, then this aspect of ratings also comes into play, wherein the securitized debt instruments should have a qualitative rating in order for the markets to function properly or to assure the investors investing in these securities. So are we looking towards a very robust rating framework as well?
Yeah, so Aditya, currently also our SDIs, securitized debt instruments, they are required to have a rating. So
Sure.
similarly, these proposed sustainable securitized debt instrument, they will also be required to have a rating.
And would it be an independent rating by any other organization, or it is only the rating by the registered entities?
Currently, we have mandated, like in debt securities, you have to have credit rating. So here also in securitized debt instrument, we have mandated you have to get a credit rating from SEBI registered credit rating agencies, of course. So that's how it is for these instruments also. Because for seeing the credit worthiness of an instrument, of course, credit ratings are very important, and which is very essential for investors to know where their money is going, the credit worthiness of the issuer. So of course the credit rating requirement would be there, and it is there today as well.
Thank you for explaining the securitization framework and how you propose to build on it when it comes to ESG securities. Now, another aspect of this consultation paper which merits consideration, it is the independent review or external review. So what is the need for an independent external review for ESG debt securities, as well as for the sustainable securitized debt instruments?
So globally, we have been seeing the news these days about the credibility of these instruments. If, for example, issuer is saying something is green or something is social, but who will verify that these are actually green or actually social? Or for example, the issuer which has set KPIs, if they are actually meeting those targets or not. So to address those kind of challenges, this independent review becomes very essential. So that's why it is the need of currently there have been a lot of news regarding the credibility of such instrument. And to facilitate and augment the credibility of such instrument, independent review will be very crucial given the nature of such instrument. So, for example, issuer is claiming that they are actually doing some green project, but if in reality, if they are not doing that, who will look after that? So that's where this third party assurance or third party review comes into the picture. So of course, this is very important, and this will instill the confidence in the investors ultimately. So this will benefit both issuers also and then the investors also.
It will instill basically the trust. So uh, this trust and the confidence will be built for the investor's point of view. So we are looking at both ways, like from the issuer's perspective and from the investor's perspective. So it will give a kind of boost confidence. Okay, somebody is looking into this. So we have this trust and we can go forward and invest our money. So this is where the independent review becomes very crucial.
And as we have mentioned throughout the consultation paper, that we'll be aligning our framework with international practices. So if we see ICMA's principles, they focuses on the importance of external review. So yeah, even in line with international practices and to boost the investor confidence, this third party review is pretty crucial.
Very well explained. And having said that, could you also throw light on the key components of the second party opinion, verification, certification, which also have been mentioned in the consultation paper as important aspects for the independent external review?
So as I've mentioned, ICMA principles focuses on the importance of external review. So those principles tell external review can take any of the forms. So that can be second party opinion, certification, verification, or scoring or rating. So even in Indian context, we are trying to align our requirements related to independent party with that of those principles that are followed globally.
I see. This lends us the much needed clarity, and I'm sure it will help the stakeholders in providing their valuable inputs on this consultation paper. This brings us to the end of our discussion. We thank you for your time. Is the need of the hour that regulatory decision making is centered around proper risk management and long term planning to ensure that corporate sustainability initiatives serve their designated purpose. Transparency and accountability are crucial for all stakeholders at this critical juncture of ESG transformation and sustainable financial innovation. Dialogues, such as the present one, are not only important for consensus building and collaboration, but also for the adoption of prudential standards and robust legislations for regulatory oversight and vigilance. We thank you for your time and we look forward to having more such discussions.